This is Excalibur Heavy Battle Cruiser. And after quite the long wait once more, we're going to start a new series where we learn to improve our gameplay skills. So yeah, this is our ship. That much we know. Alright, right off the bat. One very common mistake a lot of newer players do is move very carelessly. This can end very badly. To avoid such scenarios from happening, we have to move carefully. Now, if you want to know my keybinds, I use mouse to move, look around, and then left click to thrust. You can use other setups as well, but this is what I personally use, and it's worked pretty well for me at least. If you're on the controller, it's a bit more questionable, but still. Controlled movement is the way to go for a lot of these encounters. However, there will be scenarios where you do need to move rather fast. Like against these lasers. This is where practicing the skill of determining when to move fast and when to have controlled movement really comes into play. Alright, I shall, for one, pick up a weapon that has decent damage up close and personal. I also picked up Amp Shield because it does give you better damage. Although I do understand if you pick up something like Reflect for your first few playthroughs, because it does provide you with a lot of shield benefits. The main thing is, although I don't blame you, you should try not to get too attached to a certain shield and stuff. It's good to have variety in your playstyle, because Nova Drift really is about build variety. Now, for which body you should take, I generally recommend you stay away from the tankier bodies like Battery or Carrier, because they don't have as much thrust. I also recommend staying away from the bodies that are more complicated or are very niche, or require a certain playstyle to get right, such as Hullbreaker and Viper. However, once you've at least got the hang of some movement techniques, you can start playing around with every body. In fact, I recommend you do so. Me personally, I'm going to use a pretty standard assault. Now comes the second lesson of Nova Drift. How to avoid enemy attacks. Well, the first thing obviously is delete the enemy. Unfortunately though, there will be enemies that can weather your shots. And you just get punched for it. Alright, I have to be very careful. This is what you call a screen wrap. It avoided me from getting insta-killed by Seraph Titan. I had barely enough HP, barely any HP, and one more hit from it would kill me. Screen wrapping is a technique you should be using a lot more often. I don't really see new players using this often enough, in my opinion. But trust me, screen wrapping goes a long way in keeping you alive. That being said, if you cannot screen wrap, you can also try to circle around enemies to flank them. or to make sure that their attacks miss you, or at least have a higher chance of those attacks missing you. Of course, there'll be some enemies where they just litter the screen with bullets, and those ones you want to destroy as fast as you can. I also notably want to destroy this big yellow enemy, or orange enemy, because it litters the screen with a bunch of enemies that fire a whole bunch of rockets. Although the rockets are destructible, they do deal decent damage. Alright, next up, we're going to learn about telegraphs. Because certain enemies will have telegraphed attacks, like these hammerheads. Their circles will shrink down until it shrinks down completely, and then they dash towards you, like now. You can use this to your advantage and lure them into a certain concentrated spot, and then destroy one of them to start a chain reaction. This also ties in well with another lesson of mine, learning enemy behavior. For instance, pulsars will try to evade your attacks, but they can only do this once, so builds that have high rate of fire or large sweeping attacks can deal with them fairly effectively, whereas builds that are more concentrated or have slow projectiles will struggle. Right, I shall now take Splinter. Targeting is also pretty fun. Alright, this is another enemy you have to take note of. Shredder Mines. With these, firing at them is not the best course of action. Instead, you want to run past them, and then they'll detonate. I got lucky there with the Comet, but unlucky with this formation. You run past them, and then you get out as fast as you can. With enough skill, you could technically learn where the splinters will go, but for newer players, I don't really recommend trying to test that too frequently. Alright, I'm gonna have to use Screen Wrap again. And then I'm gonna have to Screen Wrap again. Yeah, let's delete the smaller enemies fast. One very, well, how should I put this? One very helpful mod that newer players should definitely take is Shield Cooldown. Because if you do lose your shields, it'll come back faster with that mod, of course. It might not sound like much, but trust me, it can save you. It also has no downsides, so you should definitely consider taking it. Alright, we're starting to build our weapon up pretty effectively. Alright, now for Celestials. Even though we do have a weapon that deals better damage up close, we still want to keep our distance from it. Because if we don't, we'll take a lot of damage. We also have to actively try to flank it. In general, they're very dangerous enemies, and should definitely be taken care of fast. Okay, so this is a lesson on learning certain enemy attacks. Some of them, of course, are a lot more dangerous than others, Those Myrmidon grenades, for example, have cluster explosions, which deal quite a lot of damage if you stay in them. So, don't do that. Instead, you want to get out of them, if you want to try to outrun them as much as possible. And if you can't, and if you still get hit by the initial explosion, you should still attempt to get away. Now, one thing Noah Drift does communicate fairly well is that Stationary Mega has some weaknesses. And by some, I mean 5 of them. Alright, let's destroy these guys. And let's get Terminate while we're at it. Definitely surround and get them. Next up, we shall take Challenger. This could be risky. Or not. That comment really helped us out there. Yeah, I really had to circle around the enemies. Unfortunately now I cannot really fire at my enemies. Because if I do, I'll just invite a whole bunch of destruction towards me. Alright, some tracers. With these guys, you really want to make sure you circle around them. Because if you don't, you'll get stuck in their bullets, which have lingering fiery trails that deal sustained damage. Next up, let's line my shots up and destroy 3 vanguards with 1 shot. With 1 volley. Right, let's retreat back up and let's take care of these guys. You made the mistake of coming right next to a black user. Alright, time to learn another lesson about enemy behavior. You have this big guy, and if you try to attack from the front, it hurts a lot. So instead, you want to flank them from behind. However, it's not that simple. Instead, you want to take it from the sides, and a little bit to the rear, but not fully forward, fully to the rear. Take out its rear parts, and then you can give it the back shot. Alright, next up, this is another important lesson to learn. If you're playing Wild Metamorphosis, and if you encounter a rare mod, or an ultra rare mod, that takes precedence over the other mods. Because if you want to pick this up, you better make sure you take it right away. Because if you re-roll it, chances are it's not gonna show up. Or at least it's a lot less likely for them to show up compared to the regular mods or the regular rarity wild mods. Alright, time to fix up Scion. We got lucky that the Cherub didn't get to shield it. And now we can get up close and deal a whole lot of damage at once. One more shot shall do it. Alright, let's retreat and take care of these guys. Same thing here and there. super mods can have pretty interesting properties. Right now, I'm hovering over the least interesting mod. No, least interesting super mod, I mean. Which is Mastery. And generally, it's a good pick for weapon builds. Very few exceptions where you don't want to pick that up for a weapon build. Alright, let's go behind them using a tactical screen wrap that took out all of those tracers. Another shot take care of the rear and the bulwark itself, actually. I underestimated my own destructive capabilities. Now we shall learn about stabilization. In my opinion, the stabilization tree is just amazing. Now yes, you do have to worry about several new keybinds, but in my opinion, it's worth it to learn those things. Because for one, you can dash back, which may not seem that useful right now, but in certain circumstances where you need to like keep a bit of distance from your enemies like this, it can come in handy. It's because you no longer have to straight up turn your ship around to back off. Obviously, I'll take Snipe. Now, Adaptive Armor is another underrated mod tree that I recommend people pick up, because it can kind of prevent you from just getting murked by enemies. Maybe not full-blown prevent, but still help out against burst damage that tends to catch people off guard. Next up, let's take care of that little spawner. They also have a very fitting name called Hives. Now let's take Juggernaut. This does provide us with a bit more survivability, and it shall teach us another thing about Nova Drift. The more experienced players here probably already know what I'm going for. Right, first of all, that's a fair bit of damage. I think I want a bit more. Right, we're doing some decent damage. Alright, this is why you need to learn how to circle around enemies. Because Crucible demands you circle around it. That being said, you do have to be careful when circling around enemies. Because, this can happen. You use controlled movement to circle around enemies. Get too close, and that can happen. But get away too far, and you may not be able to avoid their attacks entirely. Instead, keeping mid-range is important. You want to maintain a balance. That took care of the Eclipse very well. And then that cleaned it up very well as well. Now we shall take up Blitz. They may not make much sense right now, but eventually it will. Yeah, we need to circle around these guys. Otherwise, those attacks would have torn me apart, or at least taken away my shields. Right, there seems to be just mines, so I can just brush past them. Let's see what's up next. Okay, it's these guys. Not very troublesome. Alright, next up, if you see stuff like this that don't really help out all that much, you can re-roll it. Although I can definitely see people screaming over absorption and streamline. Now for something that Nova Drift doesn't tell you immediately. There are some very surprisingly good synergies in the game. Synergies that you expect to be dog shit are actually very good, such as Singular Strike and Flak. You expect this thing to be a piece of garbage, but actually, this thing is solid. It's okay if you didn't understand that thing beforehand, because you don't expect it to be good. You expect Flak to be about having a lot of projectiles, and then concatenating all the projectiles into one sounds like a dumb idea, when in fact it isn't. There are a lot of other hidden information and hidden synergies that you may not expect in Nova Drift, and which is why I recommend you to join the Nova Drift Discord. It's got a lot of people there, many of them are cool, and you get to learn about the game's inner workings, or at least some of the more secretive stuff. You also get to see me there, streaming from time to time. So if you enjoy having a Discord server to join into, be sure to give the Nova Drift Discord server a try. The link shall be in the description, of course, as always. Now, I need to keep my distance and then detonate all of them at once. I barely dodged all of them. Now I shall take Essence Sap, because that's usually a great option. Next up, I think I'm gonna re-roll these and get something more worthwhile. Like, agility is pretty good. Being able to look enemies faster is always a benefit. That was probably an empowered shot, which is why it was so much more powerful than the other shots. Alright, let's take care of these guys. Time to scream now. Yeah, Seraph definitely requires you to scream that. That was a very hefty hit. Let's keep our distance from that mine. It's Seraph, which destroyed the mine as well. This boss does demand you to be fairly careful, because if you try to outrun Seraph, chances are it may backfire and just take and get you killed. However, if you try to juke him, it may actually work out in your favor. If you want a more detailed guide on beating up bosses, I shall put a poll on my YouTube channel, and you can decide which boss I should teach you to fight. Because there are some bosses that people struggle against, and one of them is Seraph. Which is very understandable, since Seraph is one of the scarier bosses out there. Alright. This is Antimatter Rounds, and the red text is scary, I can admit, but in actuality, it's not that bad. Sadly, the game doesn't give you exact information on how much self-damage you'll take. Which is why, like I said, you should give the Nova Drift Discord a try. Right, let's keep our distance, and then do that. That was a very solid hit. Let's keep our distance again, and take care of that formation. Now comes Incendiary Strike, which is very powerful. It kind of scales off with how much damage you deal in one single hit. So the more powerful that single hit is, the more ridiculous Incendiary Strike becomes. And here, it's very solid. Right, I appreciate a reroll. I don't appreciate those Myrmidons though. And I don't appreciate this Bulwark that is very dangerous. Yeah, that's some hefty burn damage. You know what? Let me finish it off. Alright, let's keep my distance once more. Just because you have a close-range weapon doesn't mean you cannot convert it into a long-range weapon as well. Alright, time to beat up Star Eater. And this boss, more so than every other one, including Seraph, demands you to scream out. That was an unfortunate miss. Now that, on the other hand, was a very good hit. Let's dodge that. Look at that! We took care of Star Eater. Alright, let's reroll and get the last mod that I really want to tell you about. Strafe. Let's clear those guys first. And then we shall also take Force Armor because self-damage resistance helps out quite a bit. Strafe may just be one of the best mobility mods out there. Alongside Blink, it can really save your life. So for me, I put forward strafing to shift, backward strafing to scroll wheel down, and then side strafing to A and B. I will say, side strafing can be confusing. And I don't blame you if you don't use it entirely. It's once again a skill you can practice. But it is understandable if you don't want to use it. However, forward strafing and back strafing on the other hand are pretty intuitive and stuff you should definitely learn. Depending on how fast you are, you can go places. In just a second and several milliseconds, I just went to the other side of the screen. You can also back away much faster than with Civilization. Alright. With that being said, I think I've taught you most of the basics of Nova Drift. Before we do end things off, you should definitely implement some of these advice into your into your Nova Drift gameplay as well. This one is about visibility. I will say there are definitely aspects of Nova Drift which are flawed, and one of them is your player visibility. Which is why I recommend you turn up player visibility to high. And although this beta version probably isn't out yet for the regular branch, it will be pretty soon, and this contains a very useful visibility option for asteroids. which is one of the common ways for people to die because asteroids are so hard to see otherwise. This setting is such a boon for us players. I really do have to thank Chimeric for adding this. This single-handedly makes this update worth it. Aside from that, you can also disable other stuff like screen shakes and screen flashes to give your eyes less strain. Lastly, I recommend you take a look at the Learn section and the Glossary section, because they can contain some information that a lot of newer players overlook. Granted, these are not foolproof, like I said before, but it can still help you get your build set up, and it can also somewhat teach you how calculations occur. With that being said, my name is Excalibur Heavy Battlecruiser, and as always, may the Forks be with you all.